Hi, I'm Megan Lang, and this is my job market paper on contracting for electricity in the presence of poor storage, transaction costs, and liquidity constraints. In this paper, I study the extent to which transaction costs and liquidity constraints distort demand for prepaid solar electricity. I then go on to consider what my results imply about the welfare impacts of rural electrification. Prepaid goods and services are a popular tool for contracting with low-income households. However, a problem arises when prepaid goods don't store well and involve substantial transaction costs. Consumers facing transaction costs for a good that stores poorly have two options. They can buy in bulk, which limits transaction costs, but it generates waste because of poor storage. The alternative is to eliminate waste, but incur transaction costs more frequently. In this paper, I'm particularly concerned about liquidity-constrained consumers. Without the liquidity to buy in bulk, these consumers have no choice but to incur high transaction costs. So I designed a field experiment to study consumer behavior and welfare around prepaid solar electricity in Rwanda. Consumers with pay-as-you-go solar contracts make a small down payment to have a solar home system and some high-efficiency appliances installed in their home. After that, they pay for solar access time, which is time when they can use their solar home system. When they run out of solar access time, the solar company remotely locks them out of their solar home system, preventing them from using more electricity. Importantly, solar access time is going to be strictly non-storable, so it runs down continuously regardless of how much the consumer actually uses it. I also document in the paper that consumers face substantial transaction costs in the form of travel time to buy this system access time. So I formalized the consumer's choice by extending Deaton's precautionary savings framework to include a second non-storable good that involves transaction costs. High transaction costs increase the precautionary savings motive for liquidity-constrained consumers, which limits their demand for this second good. My model predicts that if I relax liquidity constraints and lower transaction costs, then I should increase demand for the good on the part of liquidity-constrained consumers. However, for consumers with enough liquidity to buy in bulk, lowering transaction costs actually has ambiguous effects on total demand. The reason why is that lower transaction costs reduce the incentive to buy in bulk, which potentially allows consumers to better target their purchases and lower overall demand. I empirically test this theoretical model by partnering with a pay-as-you-go solar provider in Rwanda to randomly offer a line of credit for solar access time to 2,000 existing solar customers. Now in practice, the line of credit reduces liquidity constraints, but it also lowers transaction costs. It does that by allowing consumers to call the solar company to borrow access time rather than traveling to buy it. I use survey data from a previous paper to show that pre-experimental demand for solar is a rough proxy for the severity of liquidity constraints consumers face. So in this figure, the black lines show where I stratify my sample based on pre-experimental demand. Doing this allows me to estimate heterogeneous treatment effects based on the severity of liquidity constraints consumers face. So these are my results. As you can see, responses to the line of credit are strikingly heterogeneous. Consumers who are the most likely to be liquidity constrained, which are these consumers all the way over on the left, increased demand for solar electricity by 88% over the control group. On the other hand, consumers who are the least likely to be liquidity constrained, those who are over here on the right, reduced demand by up to 6.5%. In the paper, I show that the increase in demand among the most liquidity constrained consumers cannot be driven only by consumers who actually use the line of credit. That suggests that simply guaranteeing access to credit increases demand. My results are consistent with my extended precautionary savings model. And in the paper, I show that alternative frameworks cannot fully explain all of my empirical results. Finally, I consider what my results imply about the welfare impacts from rural electrification. I use random variation in the fee charged on the line of credit to estimate a demand curve for electricity that is less distorted by liquidity constraints and transaction costs. Then I use my estimated demand curve to construct a conservative lower bound on consumer surplus from electricity. As you can see from this first table, my lower bound is up to 44% higher than similar estimates in the literature. This underlines the importance of accounting for market frictions and revealed preference measures of welfare. However, in the second table, you can see that the marginal consumers in my sample still have a willingness to pay for electricity that falls well below cost covering or break-even levels. This suggests that governments will need to provide significant fiscal support to electrify marginal households in their pursuit of universal electrification.